Playing an instrumental role in ending apartheid in South Africa won Archbishop Desmond Tutu the 1984 Nobel Peace Prize. That did not end his immense impact on South Africa, as he helped guide it toward a more unified future, a future based not on forgetting or avenging the past, but on healing it. Today, this joyful Nobel laureate continues to promote the power of reconciliation and his belief that all people, regardless of their differences, belong in the human family. In Klerksdorp, South Africa, Desmond Tutu was born in 1931 to a school teacher and a domestic worker who early on taught their son the value of honoring diversity. Tutu recalled, "I never learned to hate." At age 12, Tutu contracted tuberculosis and was hospitalized for nearly 2 years. During that hospitalization, he received weekly visits from Trevor Huddleston, a white Anglican priest who became a celebrated anti-apartheid activist. Huddleston's kindness was a profound effect on Tutu, who later pondered, in South Africa, a white person caring for a black township urchin maybe went to contributing to, say, a lack of bitterness against whites. At least one white man seemed to be a nice white man. Initially trained as a teacher, Tutu changed his career to theology after getting frustrated with the pitiful education system afforded blacks under apartheid. Apartheid, which is a policy of strict racial segregation, enabled the white minority, made up of British and Afrikaners, people of Dutch, German, and French descent, to dominate the majority, made up of blacks, Asians, primarily from India, and people of mixed white, black, and Asian heritage. Tutu explained, one's race determined where one could live, what schools you could attend, whom one could marry, what job one could do, and even where one could be buried. One of Tutu's most heart-wrenching encounters with apartheid occurred when he, his wife, Leah, and their children were picnicking on a black beach. Tutu remembered his daughter said, "Daddy, I want to go on the swings." And I said with a hollow voice and a dead weight in the pit of my tummy, "No, darling, you can't go." What do you say? How do you feel when your baby says, "But Daddy, there's other children playing there"? How do you tell your little darling that she could not go because she was a child, but she was not really a child, not that kind of child? And you died many times and were not able to look your child in the eyes because you felt so dehumanized, so humiliated, and so diminished. Some blacks publicly opposed apartheid, but often their actions met a brutal response. For example, in 1960, peaceful demonstrators gathered to protect the pass, which was an identification document that blacks were required to carry at all times. At the site of the demonstration, police opened fire, killing 69 demonstrators, most of whom were shot in the back when they tried to flee in what became known as the Sharpsville Massacre. After becoming Bishop of Lesotho, Tutu courageously denounced apartheid by refusing to carry the pass and publicly urging Western nations to impose economic sanctions against the South African government. Taking this controversial stance, Tutu risked imprisonment and, of course, received repeated death threats. Yet he persevered by remaining civil to his opponents. Understanding that many whites had just been born into the apartheid system and really never had reason to question it, he told white officials that justice would ultimately win, and he invited them to join the winning side. For his nonviolent approach, Tutu received the 1984 Nobel Peace Prize. Even as a Nobel laureate and later as Archbishop of Cape Town, Tutu was still not free and had to wait until he was 62 years old before being allowed to vote in his own country. When that long-awaited day arrived, it was just nothing short of glorious. Responding to the injustice of apartheid and the need for genuine and radical reform, President F.W. de Klerk dismantled apartheid, releasing leading apartheid activist Nelson Mandela from prison, and in 1994 allowed a democratic election to finally be held. Astounded, Tutu observed, people stood in those long lines, people of all races in South Africa that had known separation and apartheid for so long, black and white, colored and Indian, farmers, laborers, educated, unschooled, poor, rich. They stood in those lines and the scales fell from their eyes. South Africans made an earth-shattering discovery. Hey, we're all fellow South Africans. After more than 300 years of white rule, South Africa elected its first black president, Nelson Mandela. With the new democracy emerging, South Africa faced a really difficult decision to either punish apartheid-related offenses or let bygones be bygones. Boldly, the country chose a more constructive but challenging third option of reconciliation. To accomplish this, a Truth and Reconciliation Commission was established to hear testimony from people who had committed or suffered gross violations of human rights during apartheid and to help the parties reconcile their differences. Tutu was asked to chair the commission just as he was retiring as Archbishop. Later, he remembered, my much longed for sabbatical went out the window, and for nearly 3 years, we would be involved in the devastating but also exhilarating work of the commission. Coincidentally, the multiracial commission first met at Bishop's Court, once home to Jan van Riebeeck, who in 1652 was the first white settler in South Africa. Tutu reflected, although we were asked to deal with a period of 34 years from 1960 to 1994, what we were really talking about was what had been happening in our beautiful land since 1652. The commission collected statements from over 20,000 South Africans, approximately 1 in 10 testifying in televised hearings. Despite the first hearing being marred by a bomb scare, participants bravely came forward to tell their stories, and in doing so, often felt a great sense of relief. Perpetrators divulged human rights violations that they had committed, often issued solemn apologies, and were frequently given amnesty. Tutu saw this as an effective way of uncovering the truth. Whereas all too often in traditional trials, defendants try to gain their freedom by lying, in these hearings, perpetrators had to fully confess their crimes to gain their freedom. Victims unburdened themselves of their anguish by explaining how they or deceased family members had suffered violations. They often forgave the perpetrators and were considered for reparations. Although nothing could ever compensate for, say, the death of a loved one, reparations were at least an acknowledgement of victims' suffering and a step toward closure. Some people criticize the process as unjust, claiming that it allowed perpetrators to just get off scot-free. Tutu responded, one might go on to say that perhaps justice fails to be done only if the concept we entertain of justice is retributive justice, whose chief goal is to be punitive. We contend that there's another kind of justice, restorative justice. Here, the central concern is the healing of breaches, the redressing of imbalances, and the restoration of broken relationships. Tutu emphasized that forgiveness did not mean pretending that everything was fine or being sentimental or forgetting or condoning what had happened. Instead, it meant fully addressing the past and allowing for a new beginning. He stressed that the process was vital for South Africa, saying, without being melodramatic, it is not too much to claim that it is a matter of life and death. It is ultimately in our best interests that we become forgiving, repentant, reconciling, and reconciled people. Because without forgiveness, without reconciliation, we have no future. Personally hearing accounts of gruesome tortures and killings day after day and managing disputes between commission members eventually took a toll on Tutu, who admitted candidly, there were many moments when I thought I really should have had my head examined for agreeing to take the job of chairing this particular commission. During the course of the commission, he was diagnosed with prostate cancer. It probably would have happened whatever I had been doing, but it just seemed to demonstrate that we were engaging in something that was costly. Forgiveness and reconciliation were not something to be entered into lightly or facilely. Tutu could not help wonder if he had absorbed, in a sense, some of the anguish of those who testified. Thankfully, he recovered both in body and spirit, noting, after the grueling work of the commission, I came away with a deep sense, an exhilarating realization that although there is undoubtedly much evil about, we humans have a wonderful capacity for good. We can be very good. That is what fills me with hope, even for the most intractable situations. Until his death in December of 2021, Tutu continued to circle the globe, enthusiastically sharing his insights with people everywhere, especially his belief in the unity of humanity. He declared, in the human family, there are no outsiders. All are insiders, black and white, rich and poor, gay and straight, Jew and Arab, Palestinian and Israeli, Roman Catholic and Protestant, Serb and Albanian, Hutu and Tutsi, Muslim and Christian, Buddhist and Hindu, Pakistani and Indian, all belong. With a gleam in his eyes and a radiant smile on his face, the exhilarated Desmond Tutu rejoiced, all belong. Isn't that fantastic? We will now see a few more famous quotes from Desmond Tutu, followed by a song.
Desmond Tutu. He's the Reverend Archbishop. 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 Tutu. He's the Reverend Archbishop.